Okay, here we go. Nice and quiet.
Sound speeds, camera rolling.
Holding for sound. Last looks. Calling for last looks.
And set and action.
I need to swap batteries.
You know, making movies is hard.
Making movies is hard. Welcome to Making Movies is Hard, the podcast about the everyday struggles of the independent filmmaker. I am Liz Manischel, and
I am Alrik Purcell.
I didn't even do a funny voice.
That's amazing.
This week we have amazing filmmaker Jonathan Kiefer on the show to talk to us about the feature he wrote, Around the Sun.
But I love the feeling of being in production with people. Like I was saying before, you know, I like writing by myself, but then, you know, I've had many years and other scripts that are just sort of sitting there on my hard drive and they don't exist as movies. And that's okay. It's good practice. You learn things, but nothing beats the experience of being, you know, with a group of people, ideally a small group, I think, where you're all really working on it together and you can sort of share the pride of making stuff. That is what I yearn for.
We also talked to him about writing, directing, the collaborations between writers and directors, and how to get our projects off the ground. But first, Alrik, you've got mail.
My breath catches in my chest until I hear three little words. You got mail.
This week we have a question from a brand new listener, Rob O'Reilly, who says he just started listening to the show. I'm going to read his whole email just for fun. He says, I just discovered your show and really enjoying it so far. I'm a comedy writer from the stand-up and sketch world, and I'm about to direct a movie for the first time. And I was hoping you could point out the top 5 past guests pods for someone in my shoes to start with. I answered this question via email with my own little list, but I think we should just do our list now live. So like, you know, if you've never heard this freaking show before, we're episode 280 or whatever the hell this is, like what should you listen to if you're only hearing this for the very first time? So Liz, since I've been doing the show for 5 years, like, what do you think? What are your favorite episodes of the podcast?
I was looking at the list, right? And I was just thinking, like, it wasn't even like the conversations that I enjoyed the most, but it was like, what shows did I think came out the most entertaining for a listener, right? So I hope this doesn't reflect poorly on other conversations that we enjoyed so much. I just think these shows ended up as the best shows. I remember both of us, like, after we talked to Mogo, the director of The Other Lamb, we like texted each other. We're like, that was awesome. Like, we were just like on a high. So, I mean, that was probably one of my favorite shows we've ever done. And I think the episode came out well.
Yeah. Talking
to Terrelyn Shropshire was just amazing. She's so wonderful.
Yeah.
She's so wonderful.
Editor of The Old Guard, Netflix film starring Charlize Theron, which is like a crazy movie. Yeah, that was a good one.
And then I have like 3 Speed of Life related podcasts that I enjoyed listening to. So I'm going to definitely plug those. So talking to Julia Swain, talking to Josie Schrodek / Josie Azam, because her editorial credited name is Josie Azam. And then talking to the Speed of Life producers. And then I just truly enjoyed talking to Kestrin Pantera, because I thought, not only is she the most charming personality, but I felt like she was similar to us, like in terms of the frame of mind, how we see the world. And she just like has this chutzpah that was very invigorating. So those were my favorite episodes to listen to and participate in.
Yeah.
Now I've insulted other episodes. Those are just some of the episodes I like. But what about you?
So the Kestrin one I want to just talk about really quickly, because it is like this episode that like perfectly outlines like the step from being like where we're at as indie filmmakers with like, you know, like some accolades, but not so many, whatever, to going to like, you know, going to South by Southwest, getting an agent and a manager, and then being along on your journey as a successful professional filmmaker. You know, it's like, it kind of outlines exactly how that could happen and like how to navigate it. And then how it isn't this like perfect thing that's easy and great, that it is like an emotional journey. And, you know, like even when she's at South by Southwest, like she wasn't even like getting all that attention right away. And it was only kind of like after that it kind of worked out. And so it was a really great episode. But to get to my favorites, I have to talk about Justin Kurzel, director of the true story of the Kelly Gang.
Yeah.
True history of the Kelly Gang, I think is what it's called. But starring Russell Crowe, Nicholas Hoult, and a bunch of other amazing actors. And like, I really like that movie. And just talking to him was amazing. I mean, also Justin Kurzel's directed other films, such as Assassin's Creed video game adaptation, which got panned, but like made a lot of money. So it's really interesting to hear him talk about it briefly, because it's like this thing where it's like, oh my gosh, like it totally sucks because this movie didn't come out the way that it could have. But then again, it did this for my career, and it's allowed me to continue to do other projects. So it was really interesting to hear that stuff. Mel Gorzada Shamoska, who we just talked about. Oh my God. God, dude, I want her to be my mentor. Like,
yes.
Like, she's incredible. Like, I feel like if I had her like as my directing mentor, like I would be so much like further along in my journey as an artist. I mean, geez, she's amazing.
My favorite part of that episode was when she's like, oh yeah, I just told the actor that I didn't like it. And then that was my feedback. Like the way she just is honest and transparent and like is not afraid to have honest conversations on set. Like I've never heard a director tell an actress or an actor like that they didn't like something, and she did it. Right. And she's charming. And if she told me she didn't like something, I'd be like, thank you, Mogo. Like, I love hearing you talk, and I love everything you have to say.
The thing that she says about like the truth, like looking for truth in the monitor.
Yes.
And it's like either it's there or it's not. And like, oh, maybe they just have to close their mouth or like keep their eyes like open a certain way. And there's the truth is, and like, it's like, oh, you don't worry about why I'm asking you to do this. Just do this. Trust me, it's going to be great. It's like that kind of direction. I mean, I wish I was at that level where I could just be so like, straight with my just actors. Frank. Yeah, exactly. Maybe one day I'll be there. But I guess also it's like the trust. They have to trust you in order for you to do that. And I mean, obviously she's made so many movies and, has so much acclaim that like, obviously any actor working with her is just going to trust her, and also just because of the person she is. I'm sure you meet her in person and you're like, oh my God, whatever you say. And then Jared Hess, director of Napoleon Dynamite, we had him on for our 100th episode back when Timothy Plain was the co-host, and that was just an incredible conversation and kind of like, in some ways affirmed my suspicions of a director at that level, and then in other ways kind of blew up like what my assumptions were. Like he talked about after Napoleon Dynamite, like he didn't have to do anything. Like he didn't have to move to Los Angeles. He didn't have to conform. Like he got to keep his life in Utah the way that he wanted it. And then he's just lived there forever. And he's never had to go to LA. And he's had, a very successful career as a director. But again, that probably only happens if you have a hit like Napoleon Dynamite, right?
It's like the example that everyone brings up and will bring up forever is Napoleon Dynamite, right? It's like that surprise Sundance hit film that right. Just kind of like came out of nowhere.
And then it kind of sounds like, based from talking to him, it's like those circumstances like are not repeatable. Like you can't do that again. Like that only happened because of that time, that movie, that year. It's not like a thing that's gonna happen again. So, I just think it was a really interesting conversation. It's a really great learning piece, I think. And obviously he was just a lot of fun. He does voices. He's a comedy guy. He's just a fun guy to talk to. So that's a good one. Also, Tara Lynn Shropshire, I have to say again, amazing. Worship. Oh my God, dude.
And I'm trying to figure out why I loved her so much. And it's like with Mogo, it's like just the personality, just the aura around everything they're saying. It's like relatable, inspiring, and clear, right? She answered every question clearly where you can understand the whole arc of what she was trying to say. And Mogo as well. And
she's like, a Hollywood studio editor, she's in the system. She's like, in this world. And it was just so interesting to hear her talk about her career and how it's gone for her from her perspective, because I think looking from the outside looking in, you're like, oh my gosh, you're just like at the top level. Like you're at this thing, you're on the top, but then hearing the way that she approaches each project and the way that she navigates her career, it kind of sounds similar to the way that you would at the indie level or any other level, So it was just a fascinating conversation. Hilton Day, the first assistant director on most of my projects, including my first feature, The Alternate. That was an incredible conversation. I think that wasn't with you, right? That was Timothy.
No.
Yeah, right.
I'm like, I haven't heard that one. I haven't heard
Yeah.
the Jared Hess one or the Hilton Day one.
So that one is amazing because he talks about like starting as a PA and then like he worked out of the San Francisco market, and basically any big budget Hollywood movie that shot in San Francisco he was on. And then he was the second assistant director on Sorry to Bother You, the first assistant director on Last Black Man in San Francisco. And he's had 3 movies that he's worked on get into Sundance every year. First it was Sorry to Bother You, then it was Last Black Man, and then it was Big Bear, which is coming out soon. And now hopefully it's The Alternate will be the 4th. And so every year they'll have a movie that has been in Sundance. So I'm really hoping that I can take the Hilton Day luck across to my own movie. But
that's what he offers, right? He says, I'll be your AD and I'll get you into Sundance.
Exactly. That's part of the contract,
deal.
right?
Yeah.
No, but I mean, it's just an amazing story about like hustling and like, getting yourself onto set, what it's like to be on set and like what it takes to be on set. And just sort of like a lot about the assistant director department and like how that works and how it goes. And it's just a fantastic conversation. And then lastly, we did these series of episodes like back, I don't know, God knows when, probably like episodes 150, 160, somewhere around there, maybe even earlier, all about AFM. Because I went to AFM trying to pitch my movie, The Alternate, years ago. And I basically broke down exactly how it worked out, like what it was like, my experience, and then if I would go again as a director and a writer, or if it's like, no, that's not a place for directors or writers to go. And so I think those episodes, I think there's 2 of them. They were really good to like kind of break down what it is. Cause like before going to AFM, I barely knew what it was. And there wasn't really that much information about what it actually is like online. It was sort of like, oh, here's what it is. Here's the purpose. Oh yeah, go pitch your projects. Oh yeah, you can sell your movie. But it's like, no, that's not really the reality, And so, yeah, I think if you're considering AFM as a place to go with your project, like those episodes will help to like, clear it up. Basically.
It's super smart because it's like, yeah, it's in Santa Monica, right? So it's, if you don't live in LA, you have to really make a financial investment to decide whether to come to AFM. And
Right.
It kind of gets treated as this, like, you must go to event, but it sounds like that you're way more honest about what the value of it is or can be.
Right. So yeah, I think that's a good like little overview of like episodes of the podcast. I feel really bad because, we've had like hundreds of guests, and there's so many great episodes of the show that I would love to champion, but it's honestly hard to remember some of them because there's been so many, and then on the other hand, it's just like you can't talk about all of them. I'll have to go through the show at some point and like make like a top 10 list or something, that encompasses every single episode, so like new listeners can
or we
learn
could do
about
a
the show.
poll. I know I keep talking
Yeah.
about polls and I never create them, but like we could poll everyone and be like, vote for your favorite episode, and we can rank them based off of what people like.
I think that's a great idea.
I'll put together that poll.
Okay, nice. Now that you're a freelancer, you have time, right?
Sometimes I do actually. So if you want to be like Rob O'Reilly, who wrote into the show to ask us about our favorite episodes for him, and you want to send us a question, comment, or suggestion, you can do that, and do that to podcast@makingmoviesishard.com. If you like this show, you can leave us a review on iTunes or any of the places you can leave reviews for podcasts. We also have a Patreon page. Alrik, if they want to support the podcast, what should people do?
They should go to our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/MMIH podcast, and you can give us $1 a month. You can give us $5 a month, or if you want one of our, dwindling amount of pins that we have, you can give $9, even just for 1 month, and we'll send you an awesome Making Movies is Hard pin, which is like the coolest pin ever. Like, I actually gave a couple of my pins to my family members, and now I can't get them back. And so I probably need to get more pins from you.
Note to self, send Alrik more pins.
And I also wanted to thank our newest Patreon supporter, Lionel Kahn, who is a longtime listener of the show, a friend of the show, and just a really wonderful person. And so thank you so much for, supporting us. And he's also a filmmaker too. He's working on his first feature. So yeah, Lionel, you rock. Thank you.
Thank you,
very
Lionel.
much. And then lastly, make sure to check out our Instagram page, which is still getting posts. Maybe less posts than it was a couple weeks ago, but still having action on it. And then we do have a new YouTube page, which you can find in the bio on our Instagram page. And you should go over there and you can watch us talking right now. Like you can see the hand gestures and the movements that are happening on camera for both of us. So yeah, check it out. We're growing, we have 125 subscribers as of now. Hopefully we can get to 200 in the next, I don't know, couple months maybe.
Do that.
So yeah, I mean, I'm really trying to build up the YouTube page and like get it to the point where, we do have like 1,000 subscribers or something, but I mean, we just need to post more videos, and we're posting one every week now, which is great. So check that out. And then yeah, anything else that we want to talk about?
Oh, well, we had a request for stickers, and I'm looking into it, and I'm going to touch base with our amazing graphic designer, Lucas Colshot, to see if he's kosher with us making stickers out of his amazing logo. But I think we're going to make those available on Patreon as well.
Ooh.
So I haven't talked to Alrik about this, but Alrik, does that sound good?
Yeah, let's do it. What's the price
Okay.
point that you want to put them at? Are you going to say $3, $4?
I was thinking $5. I was thinking
Ooh,
$5. So then we have
yeah.
to incentivize the $5 level.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I can't wait to see these stickers. I'm sure Lucas is going to want, he's really proud of his logo, and he's really excited that we love it so much. And so I'm sure he's going to be okay with stickers and maybe t-shirts, maybe in the future. We'll see. Not right now, maybe later. I think without any more jibber jabbing, we should get to our conversation with Jonathan Kiefer. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you. I'm delighted.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We start off a little differently. We do 5 questions in the beginning, rapid fire style. And so this will be all about Around the Sun.
Right. Let's see if I can handle these questions. Yeah.
Oh, you can handle them, I think. How many days did you shoot the film?
I believe we had a 16-day shoot, if I recall correctly.
What was the budget?
The budget, I'm authorized to say, was somewhere between 100K and infinity.
Cool.
On the lower end of that spectrum.
Lower end of infinity, got it.
Yeah.
How long did you work on the film from inception to being released?
From inception, from the Christopher Nolan film of that name. It was
Exactly.
It was strange, actually. I watched that movie, and then Leo DiCaprio appeared in my dream, and then suddenly I had this idea. No, it was, it's funny how, depends where you start counting, because Oliver, the director, and I have known each other for a long time, decades now. And we met in film school at Boston University way back when. And I acted in his thesis film. And that was, in the previous millennium. And we finally eventually got back in touch. And for a couple of years have been talking about working on a feature together, because neither of us had done it. And it sort of came to pass that the idea was for me to write something and he would direct it. We tried another project for which we developed a script that I still have, but we didn't, it was too ambitious, I think, for first timers. So that kind of got shelved. And then eventually Around the Sun came to pass when both of us just got restless. And I was like, all right, let's just do something that we can really do. And, eventually we sort of got the momentum going for that. And it was about 3 weeks to write the script from when the idea was figured out. And then 4 years from when that happened until right now, which is when it's, being released. That's not a very short answer. Sorry.
Did you do a lot of rewrites along those 4 years?
No, I mean, most of that time, I guess, fortunately, I'm not sure, is really more about, going from having a script to getting it shot and then doing post, and then finally sort of getting it into festivals, and then going through the festival cycle, and now getting to the release phase. I mean, this, we sort of batted around a few ideas because we had the location, and it was sort of reverse engineered to go with the place that we had access to. And we had I sort of came up with a dozen or so movie ideas and said, do any of these strike your fancy? And he said, this one might be good, this one might be challenging. We're trying to do this micro budget thing, so this might be off the table. And eventually the place, the Chateau that we had access to, actually is the place where Fontenelle wrote and set the book that is referenced in the movie. And I discovered that fact. And being sort of like a sci-fi astronomy geek from, way back when, that kind of really caught my imagination. And I was like, let's do this. Let's turn this into a movie. And I think Oliver wasn't sure about it. And I was like, no, just let me write a draft and I'll show you the script. And so it was kind of a risk. But then, that's what we went with, because it was the most sort of peculiar and unique and seemingly achievable on the small end of our budget scale.
Well, 2 quick questions and then we'll get into it. How big was your crew?
Yeah, we had, 16? No, 13 people, 13 or 14 people. Yeah.
Awesome.
Small crew, very intimate group. And I miss them and I love them. Yeah.
And then out of all your projects, how difficult was this one?
It's a weird question to answer because on the one hand, it was designed to be as simple as possible. And it came from the frustration of other projects not being possible. But then of course, like I said, even something that was so quickly written took a long time to realize. So, I mean, on some levels, it's the easiest because it's the only feature that, I've made, really. And there are others that haven't been made. But it was also very challenging in a lot of different ways, as most are, I'm sure.
Let's take a step back, just because, again, I haven't seen the movie as per usual. I'm the lazy one. But when I've seen the materials and I've talked to you about it, I framed it in my mind as like Before Sunrise in the UK. Like that's what it is in my mind. Or in Europe. I actually don't even know if it's in the UK, to be honest.
It's in France,
Okay, so there we go. So
but the actors are English, so there's Before Sunrise with English accents. Yeah.
Exactly. So then you just referred to your love of astronomy and science fiction. So can you bring us, we don't normally do this. We don't usually ask for a synopsis, but this is such an unusual film. Could you talk just like briefly about the blending of genres, I think that was undertaken with this film?
And I appreciate that. It's, it is kind of hard to synopsize it, which is strange because it really is basically just 2 people talking for the length of a movie in essentially one location, although they kind of move around. It's about, the premise is that a guy comes to check out this chateau in Normandy, and he's a location scout for a film production that might be happening there. And the woman who shows him the place is delighted to tell him about the sort of history of this particular place, at which was written this book called Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds in 1686 by Bernard de Fontenelle, which was a real book. And it was one of the first sort of popular science texts that was written as basically a dialogue between a man and a woman that's very flirty, and they kind of spend several nights going out in the gardens and talking about how the cosmos works. And this is one of the first books to kind of popularize the idea that in fact the Earth goes around the sun and not the other way around, which was still kind of a new and radical concept at the time that it was written. So the place that we made the movie is where that book was written and set. And so I, thought that's fascinating, and I decided to weave that into the story. And there are some parallels between the way the book unfolds and the way the movie unfolds. And I don't know if that explains it, but just, all the other ideas that I had for, how could you do a movie with the minimum possible locations and characters that could be set in a beautiful chateau in France were kind of conventional, like we're like, oh, we could do a World War II thing where it's people hiding out from the Nazis, or, we could do a horror thing or something. And it was hard to sort of get my head around that in a way that could really be fresh or at least kind of unique to us. And but the thing about Fontenelle and his book just really it's a beautiful book. I mean, it seems very contemporary. It's very flirty and engaging. And if you like sciencey stuff and astronomy stuff, it's like candy. So I couldn't get that out of my head. And I was like, let's make a movie about this. And at the time it was like, Oliver, we're nobody's ever going to see the damn thing anyway. Let's just get something made. And, he bought it. So that's, I'm glad that happened.
So without like ruining any spoilers or anything, I mean, would you call this an adaptation of the book? Because having seen it, it's kind of, I haven't read the book obviously, but like just from your brief explanation of the book, it almost feels like it could be an adaptation.
Yeah, it's in a weird sort of category where I've described it as inspired by the book, because there's a section in there which I think paraphrases and quotes from the book a little bit directly. And she the woman shows the guy around the house, and she talks a lot about the book. She's like a super fan of this book, and that's kind of part of the, what they flirt about, which is totally nerdy, but I love that. But otherwise, it's sort of it goes in its own territory, and I mean, it's obviously, it wouldn't exist without the book, but it's not directly an adaptation. Very kind of experimental in that way, and we'll see how people like it, if they do.
What I love is that like most micro-budget filmmakers are like, let's write to our resources. Let's write in this, like, maybe there's like the, disheveled cabin in the woods, but you're like, no, we have I'm sure you've heard this question before. We have like a chateau in France we have access to. So how did you access this castle? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, because I've been kind of hammering home with Oliver that idea of like, come on, man, we've got to have the resources that we need and the experience to make something. And at some point he said, well, my friend has this chateau in Normandy. And I was like, you're kidding. Like, okay, let me stop you right there. There's got to be something we can do with that. And I mean, it becomes, like I said, it was kind of a risk once you decide to make that the key element of the movie. And he sent me pictures, and I was like, wow, this is beautiful, and how great would it be to make something there. And it did sort of speak to, my interest in like Eric Rohmer films, which are often set in places like that, and people go around talking a lot. It sort of captured my imagination a little bit in and of itself. And the funny thing is that the Chateau was the reason we started with this particular project, and it's very specific to that place. But then as we were moving forward, we lost our access to the Chateau because his friend, I don't want to go into too many details about it, but the friend who owned the place was having a divorce, and they decided, they wanted some privacy and didn't really want a production happening there. So our access disappeared, and it was like, at that point, the script was already written, and
you had to find another castle in Normandy
So after beginning with the idea of use only the available resources, we then had to go and find another chateau in France. He's in London, so at least he's closer, and I'm in the Bay Area. Not an easy thing to do, but the thing is that Normandy is full of chateaus, and as it turns out, the place that we found, which is from the same period and sort of built in the same style, was owned by an English couple. So Oliver kind of hit it off with them, and he said, we were planning to do this thing, and I think they had rented it out for as sort of like a B&B kind of thing. And so he got in touch with them
Europe,
and said,
Europe
can
is
we
so
use
different.
your space? I know, it really is. And I mean, it was a bit falling apart, but that the original place was even more in disarray, and that was part of the original story. But it turned out great because the hosts were really lovely people, and it was just so sweet to be with them, and they really enjoyed it, and they made food for us, and we all sort of gathered around the piano and sang songs, and they just really opened their space and their hearts to our production. And the whole crew got to stay there, either in the main building or in the sort of nearby buildings on the property. And it helped because we were all able to sort of stay together and do our project that way. Yeah.
That's incredible. That's like, because it's really hard to get anyone to let you shoot anywhere, let alone like let them stay at their place while they're living there, and then for them to cook for you. It's like kind of
not always. We also had a food person, but
right, I know, but just even that spirit, it's like that's pretty amazing. To find that kind of collaborator,
Absolutely, and we were kind of in a bubble because like we're in Normandy. It's a very rural area, and the building itself and the buildings around it are sort of far outside of everything, and it was like being in camp, which was kind of nice, and sort of a weird way to have your first feature come to pass, because it kind of, I don't know, it might spoil me for future experiences. I mean, I like when I was younger, I worked as a PA on features and did other stuff, and I've seen a little bit about different scales of production, but this was definitely a special experience, and I mean, the movie is something that we're proud of and happy to have made, but also the experience of making it was definitely something really sweet, and yeah, I treasure that.
I kind of want to ask a little bit about the movie specifically, and I'm sorry, Liz, to
No, don't give
ask
anything
movie
away.
questions.
Don't give anything away.
It's
But it's just,
unspoilable.
it's kind of like, you know, like the whole thing about the genre that you decided to pick for your film.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, it's kind of like a very hard to describe movie, and like your synopsis doesn't really even describe what it is, because what it is, if you just really described what it was, you'd kind of be ruining part of the magic of the movie in a way.
Yeah.
Don't ruin the magic, Alrik.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
Thank you for suggesting that there is in fact magic. Because
there is magic, I think, and because like especially the way that you tell the story and the way that the story unfolds and the way that you pull us along through. I don't really want to. Should we ruin it, Jonathan, or like just say
No,
spoiler?
we said
spoiler?
it 3 times. We're not
Okay,
ruining it.
okay, we're not ruining it. Anyways, so
it's an experiential narrative, I would say.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of a hangout movie, you know. And if you don't hang out with it, you won't.
But it has this other extra element to it, which makes it extremely engaging. So but anyways, the point is, like, did you always want to make movies like this, or like, where is your heart genre wise? Yeah. Like, where did you want to go? And it almost sounds like this movie told you what it wanted to be as far as genre. Like, you had these other ideas of like horror and like a war movie or whatever, but then like it's like you just went towards this direction. It's just like it's kind of a unique direction to go in, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think I understand what you're getting at. We're sort of dancing around. There's a structural element of the movie that is sort of unusual, although increasingly less unusual from what I've been seeing lately. But I'll just say this: that at the time, you know, when I was conceiving it, I was thinking about movies like Abbas Kiarostami's film Certified Copy. I was thinking about the movies of Hong Sang-soo, who is a very prolific South Korean director who makes these really wonderful, charming films that are often very simple in terms of, you know, very few characters, and there's just a lot of hanging out and chatting, but there's sort of structural twists to those films that I like. And I remember thinking at one point, as we've presented the movie at festivals, I've been, you know, sort of telling an old joke about how like we're so frugal with this thing that we even, you know, recycled our own scenes in the movie. And so there is an aspect of the structure of it that is about that, where it's like, okay, we are really trying to do the minimal, you know, scenario here where the overhead to get this thing made is as low as possible. And one way to do that, especially if you've only got 2 characters, is a structural way with the narrative. Right. So that was something that I was thinking about. And it also, you know, that made sense to me sort of organically with regard to the inspiration of Fontenelle's book. And yeah, I recognize that as I'm saying all this stuff, you know, people listening to the podcast will be like, what the hell is he?
They have to see the movie.
More. I'm sitting here being like, I want to watch it now.
Well, please do. Yeah. I mean, as you're able to, I understand that, you know, everyone's busy.
I also just think, like, you know, compared to your average indie drama or indie, I don't even know what genre you'd put it into. Like, I guess indie romance drama, maybe. But like it's got this whole like Chateau backdrop, which is so unique. Like most movies are set in towns or cities or houses. They're not set in like this beautiful, you know, magical place, basically. Which is what it looked like, you know, from as a viewer. So it's like, I think like even just that, like you have another angle a leg up on other films just because of the visuals alone, you know, let alone the structure, you know.
Right. I hope that people respond to that.
Oh yeah. Another thing I was just like kind of getting at is like we have 3 filmmakers here in this conversation. Like if each of us had that resource, you know, if Liz and I had our own version of that Chateau to go after or whatever, we would have made completely different movies.
I know, you know? And that's fascinating.
Like, and I just think it's really interesting that like that's the direction that you went in, and it's like what felt right to you, and then it's like how this movie was born. It's really, I don't know, it's really interesting to me.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It does feel, you know, as I said early on, I think when trying to kind of persuade Oliver to go along with it, I sort of recognized like, well, yeah, of the list of the ideas that we could do, this one is the most sort of idiosyncratic, and it's the one that I respond to. And so, I'm very grateful that he and I have known each other for a long time. I'm very grateful that he sort of saw the promise of that and responded to it. And yeah, then it became a collaboration, which of course every project needs to be. And then, yeah, I couldn't have directed this movie. I mean, I'm very glad that he did it, if only for that reason, just to be able to be on the set with a group of people, including a friend who is also an experienced director, and to kind of shadow him a little bit and see how the nuts and bolts work of realizing this sort of idiosyncratic and personal project. And yeah, it's interesting what you say, because I am curious to think about that. That's an interesting exercise to imagine, like, what would, if you gave other filmmakers the same sort of basic resources, what would they come up with? And yeah, clearly very different things. And that's exciting to think about.
You kind of, you provided a great segue for my question, which is that you are a director, but you happen to write this script, and you were saying that you couldn't have directed this, which I'm taken aback by, and I'm not going to press on that because this is not therapy, but like, and we always talk about things like that. We talk about imposter syndrome a lot, but like,
oh yeah,
can you talk a little bit about the relationship with Oliver, what your boundaries were as a creative force in this project, and also why he directed it? Why, do you want to direct the next project? Can you, it's a lot of questions, but maybe somewhere in there, pick something.
Yeah. I mean, I felt like we had, years prior to this, we had got back in touch and had sort of decided to do something together. And so that idea that it would be something I write that he directs, existed even before this project. I mean, there was another script, as I said, and which didn't happen. And it was, that was very frustrating, because you spend years and it doesn't materialize. And then in retrospect, I look back on that other project now, and it could work as a writing sample, but I feel like the movie itself is sort of dated because it's of the time that it was written. So I can imagine that it wouldn't, it's not something to revisit necessarily. But the experience of going through a script, saying like, I'm going to hand this off to you, or, we're going to work on this together, however you want to frame it, is important. And it's important to sort of get out of your own head sometimes. And for me, I like the solitude of writing, but then I get to a point where I feel lonely and I want to be with other people who can solve problems with a fresh eye, or who can, sort of check me on my indulgences or whatever it is. And yeah, there was the idea that I would come up with something that Oliver could direct. That was always sort of part of the challenge too. Like, okay, well, I'm limiting the variables so that if you take away so many different possibilities and then you line it up so that it has to check off a few boxes, then it's sort of like, it makes it easier in a way, because you're like, all right, well, now it can only be this, so we'll do it this way. It's a very perverse, we should, maybe some therapy should be involved at another time, but it's a very perverse thing. But yeah, it's, it was always part of it. It was always part of the package. And, he had directed a lot. He had made some shorts, and he had done a lot of TV in the UK, and had been sort of yearning to do a feature. And I think, he has experience and expertise and just knowledge of workflow stuff that I don't have. And I thought, well, who else do I know that I could really hang out with for such a long period of time and just watch and learn this stuff, or at least be exposed to it in this way, where it's also my project and our project, and there's really nobody else like that. So that was very important. And yeah, I mean, going even further back in time, when we were film students together, I was an undergrad and he was a grad student, and, being in his thesis film, at that time, I remember, because we were shooting it the summer after my freshman year of college, I think it was. And at that time, I wasn't sure I was going to stay in that program. I wasn't sure I liked it a lot. I was thinking about transferring to a different school, but then doing that project, which was just the student thesis film that I think Oliver himself would tell you that he doesn't want anyone to watch anymore, because, it's from the juvenilia. But that experience was really wonderful. And, I feel really grateful to him for that, because that sort of relit the flame for me to be interested in movies. And I stayed there, and then, went on and did other things. And, it's been a long, windy road since then. But so that collaboration, it's like the movie itself. It's kind of unique, and there's probably the only one of its kind. But yeah, we wouldn't be here without it. So it's great.
Do you think, having gone through this process of making Around the Sun as a writer and a producer, that you now feel that you have the confidence and the ambition to go and write and direct your next feature? Or do you feel like, oh, I like this way of working, like I want to collaborate again with someone else?
I do want to collaborate with lots of people. I mean, the confidence, I don't know if I'll ever quite have the confidence, but I feel like that's sort of okay. Like, being in a place where you're unsure maybe is a little bit more fertile for me than being in a place where you think you know everything or something, not that it's necessarily a binary like that. And yeah, Liz, you kind of asked about that too. I'm one of the residents in the SF Films Film House program this year.
You are.
Nice. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. And I have to say that it was my application to that program was assisted by carefully listening to episodes of your podcast. So thank you for
awesome.
that.
Wow.
And just hearing guests that you've had on the show talking about their experiences. But yeah, and that's great. And the plan for that was to develop another project that I'm going to write and direct myself. And, I certainly want to do that and intend to. The confidence question is sort of weird now because of the situation we're in with the pandemic, and also just the political situation we're in right now, which we don't need to talk too much about, but it does make me sort of stop and think, well, is my project really necessary? Like, do people really, is the world, waiting for this thing? I don't know.
Right.
So I have some caution about that and circumspection about that, and I don't know, but I love the feeling of being in production with people. Like I was saying before, I like writing by myself, but then I've had many years and other scripts that are just sort of sitting there on my hard drive, and they don't exist as movies, and that's okay. It's good practice. You learn things, but nothing beats the experience of being with a group of people, ideally a small group, I think, where you're all really working on it together, and you can sort of share the pride of making stuff. That is what I yearn for the most. Yeah.
I'm going to commit a cardinal sin. I have a statement, not a question. So I love what you said about how uncertainty is more of a fertile ground for you. I think very often as creatives, we're being told, either just pretend to be confident, or that we should be acting a certain way. We should be acting like bosses or whatever. I recently got that feedback, and I'm still like mulling it over in my mind. But I think if I can interpret both mine and Alrik's nudging, and Alrik, if you allow me to, I think it's also that like we receive like a lot of personal fulfillment being directors, from that role, and we want that for other people if that's what they're inclined to do. So it's like, it's just that thought. And so my question, not statement, for you to respond, my statement, not question for you to respond to is, who cares if you think the world doesn't want to receive something that may be personal or non-political, or doesn't have to do with the massive political people that we're in right now, because it has to do with your personal catharsis too. It's just,
absolutely.
Like as a creator, you should make something, to fulfill yourself. That's all. Sorry, but please, if you want to respond to that, feel free to.
It's an interesting thought. I mean, of course, I think everybody who is a creative person has to, at some point, make a decision to go forward with putting something into the world, for people to see. And as I was saying before about Around the Sun, it's so quirky and so personal. And I even said to him, I don't know if there's an audience for this, but there's something about the difference between doing it and not doing it. And that the more I do sort of put some stock in the idea that the more personal and true to yourself you make it, the more universal it could become, because somebody somewhere is going to respond to that aspect of it alone. And that has happened. I mean, we've shown it at festivals and people have responded to it in really nice ways. I do expect as it gets more distribution that there will be people who don't get it or can't stand it or have all kinds of negative things to say.
Fuck those
but that
guys.
happens. Yeah, I mean, and I also know that, my model of being a filmmaker has always been kind of modest in that way. Like, well, how could we do it in a way that's sort of intimate and maybe not classifiable as a genre, but has a certain something that people want to experience, and maybe not, you know, a huge audience, but an audience that feels seen by the work and appreciates seeing it, and how to do that in a sustainable way, which is a big question for everybody. Yeah, I'm still sort of grappling with that. I definitely want to make more work, and yeah, there's, you know, in addition to the feature project that is sort of the core of my Filmhouse residency, there's other shorts and things that are also very personal. And, you know, I'm thinking about like trying to do some animation stuff that I could show to my kids, or that my kids could be involved with, you know, trying to figure out how to make film and cinema kind of part of your life is really the bigger goal. And there's a lot of ways to do that. And I feel like in some ways now it's, you know, it's better than it's ever been in that regard. There's still challenges, obviously. But yeah, there's, you know, the idea that it's like, well, you know, I'm in my 40s now. Like it's been such a long time since film school. I worked as a critic for a while. I didn't do film stuff for a while. And you sort of let go of this idea of like, oh, here's the path that you have to take. And that is kind of nice. Even if it means that you're toiling in obscurity for a long time. But if you're doing that with, you know, cool, creative people who, you know, and you're part of a community of people who make stuff and who watch stuff, then that's amazing. So yeah, let's hoping for the best.
I just want to speak to the whole, like, you know, why me as a writer director sort of question that we've discussing. It's like, to me, it's all about the story, right? And like the idea, and if that idea or story feels like it needs to exist as a movie, or like it's something that's really important either to you or just something that you haven't seen before that you really want to see made. And then the second half of it is like, am I the right person to direct this movie because I have an idea to how to make it a certain way that no one else is gonna think of, right?
Yeah.
And like I think about that a lot because I'm a producer too. Like I've you know, I just produced my first feature as a producer, not a director, in February, and you know, I was just thinking about like how, oh, thank you, you know, like why I did that movie, and like why there was never a conflict with me as like, oh, I should really direct this movie. It's because you read it and you know the director, and you're like, oh, this is this person's movie. Like they're the one to direct this movie for various reasons. Like, and if I were to try, like I probably wouldn't do it justice the way that this person will, right? And so I just think it's all story related, and it's really like, you know, like like Timothy, my old co-host, we talked about this a lot. It's like, what movie deserves to be made, right? And like you have to have, like, to make a feature, it's like such a huge undertaking and such a difficult thing to achieve. It's like you really need to have the idea that you believe in more than anything, because that's the thing that will drive you to finish it, you know? And I know like this whole political time we're in, it's like, yes, like what movies should we be making, like what's important, but you know, I think like there's always room for entertainment. And like as a kid growing up watching movies, no matter how bad things are going in my personal life as a kid, or you know, whatever, bullies at school or whatever it was, like movies were always a thing I could fall back on. And if I can make one more movie that does that for a kid or for somebody else, and then it's like that's a you know, that's worth it, right?
Yeah.
Which speaks to what you said about Around the Sun. It's like you made this movie that was important to you, and you're finding that other people are finding it important too. And I think that's another key element of making films. Like you don't want to service an audience, you want to service yourself first, and then like a lot of other people will relate to that if you like are true to your spirit.
Personal is universal. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's like put your own oxygen mask on first before putting it on the people next to you or the kids.
Absolutely.
In case if we can make the analogy that we're in some sort of airplane disaster, if that's what movie making is like, that's something like that. But
sometimes it feels that way.
Well, let's talk about some of the release plans for Around the Sun, because I know that we share a distributor, and I want to talk a little bit about that. And also about your relationship with critics and how you've been able to get coverage on the film. So have you been taking on that mantle of publicity? Tell us how you got it done.
Well, it's interesting. I worked as a critic for years, you know, mostly as a freelancer, but now and then on the staffs of different publications, all of which have died. It's a strange time in journalism. It's a strange time everywhere. And, you know, I'm part of the the official name is now the San Francisco Bay Area Film Critics Circle. I'm part of that group of critics, and it's a pretty big group at this point. Some of those critics I know personally and are really lovely people. And so I thought, okay, well, I have the experience and some advantage of being on the receiving end of press releases about new movies. So I know a little bit about how that wheel turns, and we don't have a lot of money for Around the Sun. So I thought, well, okay, let me, sort of take that on and see what I can do in terms of publicity. And it's definitely a hustle. Like I think, people talk about this a lot but maybe don't quite understand it. But yeah, it really, it requires constant attention to try to get people to see the movie and to cover it and to try to figure out when is the right time for them to do that. And it's a little bit awkward for me because, the people that I know who, fellow critics that I know, I still feel kind of cringy, like, okay, well, I've made a movie now and, if you're going to dish it out, you should take it. So like, you want to check it out and maybe review it. And, if they feel weird about it, I totally understand, but you still sort of have to ask, I think. And yeah, it's been a sort of slow, steady process of getting critics involved as we went to different festivals and timing some reviews with that. And then those reviews kind of build up as you go through the festival tour. And now, our release is on August 4th.
And you're 100% fresh right now, as of
we happen to be 100% fresh. We have 5 reviews, and
That's
a couple
great.
of them are from people I know. And you hear people say things like, "Oh, well, if you're 100% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, then if you get more reviews, then that." That percentage might go down, and then like that little, whatever your rating is on Rotten Tomatoes might follow you around on different platforms when people see about the movie. So,
It does.
you could be, yeah. So it's like,
around.
are you going to be self-conscious about that? And so there's this question of like, how many reviews do you actually want? And how much, also the function of how the question of how much reviews matter in terms of people reading about it and seeing it. And that's sort of hard to get good data on, I think. It's also the sort of a word of mouth thing. And, how do you work with that? The ideas that we've had about that have changed even during the course of the post-production and festival run and release of the movie. So, we're, it's like, I don't know, it's like trying to herd cats or something. And, I'm very grateful for the good, the nice things that some people have said about it, and people who sort of perceive it for what it is and acknowledge it as such, which is, not a glossy, high concept blockbuster, but a quirky little art film. I feel some degree of responsibility to do everything I can to try to get the publicity that we need for it. And that, that's a challenge, but it's also part of taking ownership of the movie, or at least, my share of the ownership of the movie. Yeah, it's been an education. I think that, also critics, I'm not really a critic anymore. I just wrote something recently for the first time in a long time, and it made me realize, like, it's been a while since I've been writing film commentary, and I miss it, but it's really hard. Like, people are losing their jobs, and freelancers are not getting paid enough, and there's all kinds of issues. And yeah, with 2 young kids, it's very hard to have time to concentrate, even though the thing that I last wrote was about movies for little kids. So I think, it's like the more narrow band of possibility. So I also recognize what it's like to be a critic and to have someone, say, hey, I made a movie, can you check it out? And can you, and it's pressure to some extent. So yeah, I'm grateful for what we've got so far.
But you think they'd be honest, right? Like if they didn't like the movie, that they would give you an honest, fair review.
Yeah. I think that the coverage that we've had so far has been generally positive, but there are people who I think are honest about how they respond. And that's kind of why I like them as critics and as people. And that's kind of what you hope for. In this case, like, you're thinking about the audience and people who haven't heard of you, haven't heard of your movie, have presumably a million streaming options that they can choose from at any given moment, and might have the same issues that I have, which are like, we have 2 little kids, and there's only a tiny narrow window of time during the day when we might actually be watching a film. One good thing about Around the Sun is that it's only 79 minutes long, so we're very considerate in that regard. But you have to sort of bear in mind what the audience's needs or desires are, and hope for the best.
And what are the general plans for the release of the film?
So now it's going to be on Apple TV and Prime Video on August 4th. And then I'm not sure how long that window is going to be, but then there's going to be sort of a further outreach to other VOD platforms, which Oliver has worked out with Giant Pictures, our distributor, your
What?
distributor.
Giant Pictures? I've never heard of them before.
They're giant. Yeah, I think, part of the plan is to see kind of how it does with these first two. And yeah, I shouldn't actually, in addition to Prime Video and Apple TV, there'll be other sort of on-demand options.
Yeah, like through TVs and stuff, like cable.
Yeah,
providers.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, I will be sort of curious to see how it goes and to see what kind of feedback we get, because it is useful. We're talking a bit about having some kind of virtual theatrical presence as well. I've been happy and lucky and delighted to be involved with the Roxy Theater in San Francisco recently, and we've been talking to them about arranging it as one of the films that they show in their virtual cinema space. And we've talked to other, or are beginning to talk to other theaters around the US and maybe Canada to do that as well, trying to figure out how to kind of time that with the VOD release. I like the idea that we could have a system where people could support little art house theaters in addition to seeing the movie, as opposed to like just watching it on Prime. And that, hopefully it, because not everybody has Prime Video. And also hopefully, that it might serve as a kind of marketing boost, word of mouth wise. But I don't know, it's hard to keep track of all this stuff, especially with regard to the weird way that virtual theatrical exists in this pandemic world. And again, also the thing about like sending out press releases and asking people to check it out. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on in people's lives right now, and to ask them to make some time and in some cases spend some money on this thing it's a not insignificant thing to be asking. I mean, to some extent, the movie is, I think, can serve pretty well as a diversion from everything that's happening in the world. So maybe it could be useful that way. But yeah, it's a strange time. And I think we're going to sort of try to stay as nimble as possible and see what happens when we release it through Apple and Amazon at first, and then hopefully be able to expand thereafter.
What's the marketing plan? Like, is Giant Pictures, do they have like a marketing push they're going to do for the film, or are you handling the marketing on your end? Like, what's the plan?
Yeah, good question. I'm not sure how much I'm supposed to talk about this, but there's really, from our experience with Giant, Liz's might be different. There's really not a lot of marketing.
They're not marketers.
Yeah, they're
basically an aggregator, but they do pitches, and they're actually successful pitches because they have a small slate.
Yeah, they establish these kind of relationships with the platforms, and so the platforms, they get a kind of preferential involvement sometimes, from what I understand. So yeah, the marketing is really up to us, and we'll keep going. I mean, I think that some degree of social media outreach is logical if we can sort of figure out I don't know, whatever kind of demographic tools you have, like from Facebook and Instagram, to think of people who might be interested in it, which is weirdly presumptuous. But then you're sort of casting it out and seeing if people are interested, and you can if you really analyze some of that data, you can customize it presumably.
What would the audience buckets be? Would it be like fans of My Night at Mods and Last Year at Marienbad?
I mean, that's one of them, of course. Definitely, people have mentioned the Before trilogy, and which on the one hand, I'm like, oh yeah, that's like, classic genius Linkletter magic, and that sets a pretty high standard. But of course, it's an influence on the movie, and there's a vibe that is part of the DNA of what we've done, which is different, of course, because it's these two English people and they're in France, and it's the weird sort of cosmological stuff. But yeah, stuff like that. And I think people who are interested in romantic movies and people who are interested in minimal scenarios, I think that I've seen it in the Apple listing. I've seen it described as both romance and fantasy, and that was, those are categories that they assigned to it.
Speed of
and,
life
you know,
is there too. Romance,
okay.
fantasy.
Yeah,
Oh,
and that makes sense.
interesting.
Yeah, and I, you know, yeah, it's for me. It's like as long as people don't go into it thinking it's going to be, you know, whatever some example of some really high concept fantasy movie is, and then wind up thinking like, oh, this is, you know, much more smaller scale than that. So yeah, getting people to kind of understand and try to manage expectations as much as you can. But on the other hand, you know, it's a movie that you sort of discover as you watch. So that's the risk that we
Right.
take when we put it out there.
Which is what I love about it. And I love that, like, you can't really synopsize it too much without ruining it.
Yeah.
Cause I think that's like some of the best kind of filmmaking where it's like, you really just have to go see this movie in order to experience it, you know?
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, I hope people do. So, but yeah, the marketing, you know, it really will be me just kind of seeing where the action is and trying to customize it. And then, you know, trying to get more reviews and using social media as much as we can, and asking friends and people who are involved with the production to let their networks know about it, and maybe asking Liz for tips, as I've been doing for probably years now, and sort of, yeah, looking at other films that are sort of in similar spaces and kind of trying to emulate what seems to work for them. And yeah, I do feel like there's a lot of invention, like you're making it up as you go along. And it all is part of the package of making movies in this sort of indie way, which I'm okay with. You know, that's it's a privilege to do it. So yeah.
So when this podcast comes out, your film will be released, or it'll be coming out like the day after or whatever. So if you're listening to this, go watch Around the Sun now. Just
Please
do it.
do.
Yeah, it's
just
only
do it.
79 minutes of your life. It's not that big.
It's
not
only
that big of a commitment.
79 minutes of your life. Yeah, or maybe more if it stays with you and you think about
And
it.
I guarantee you're gonna
Ah.
smile at least, like, you know, I don't know, probably 10 to 20 times watching the movie. So
Oh,
yeah,
That's
it'll be
nice.
worth it.
Can I write that down and use it
That's
as a blurb?
really
Sure.
good pull quote, Alrik, that you
Please.
just
Pretty nice,
pulled
thank
out
you.
of your butt.
I would be
Like,
honored.
that was
It'd be my
great.
first pull quote ever from
Pull
me.
quote. The pull quote pulled from his butt. Yes, no, that's very nice. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, it's I'm glad that it makes you smile, because that's part of what we're going for. Yeah.
And also, just as like a genre fan, I think, like, without ruining anything, like, I think those elements of it were really surprising. And then the third act reveal was like,
All right,
sorry.
we're moving on. We're moving on to the final
Okay.
5 questions.
Okay, let's do it.
So, Jonathan, we end the show with kind of some big picture look at your career, yourself. So what's the first film you ever made, and how do you feel about it now?
I think the first one I made was a movie that I made with my best friend Ed Dunn, called Feud, and it was a 16 millimeter black and white film made on one roll of film, edited in camera. Sort of a weird scatological movie about a guy grappling with his plumbing. And we shot that in Boston in our tiny little apartment. And I feel great about it. It was sort of done in a style of Eisenstein, and with Shostakovich soundtrack, and really weird and
This is
delirious.
like the most like highbrow show I've ever done at making movies this hard.
Yeah, well, this particular movie was not highbrow at all, except for that.
Your
the
references
soundtrack.
are.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's about a guy having some digestive issues. Very scatological, but it was, the spirit of that thing was so great. We were just like, let's just do something, and it came out great. Haven't watched it for a while, but I loved it. Yeah.
What's the best filmmaking advice you've ever received?
I think the advice to trust your voice, which is something that was said to me by a teacher, Stephen Geller, who is also the screenwriter of the screen adaptation of Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, which is an incredible movie, and I recommend it to everybody.
Of course, Vonnegut comes up now.
Yeah.
This is amazing.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Vonnegut's an influence too. And yeah, Steve Geller, who was a great teacher, and it's been years since I've talked to him, but yeah, he was one of the things that I remember him saying a lot was trust your voice. And when you're a young person, that's important to hear. And when you're an older person, that's important to remember, because that's, your voice is the one that's in your head all the time. And sometimes, it says things that are unpleasant, but the idea is that that's what makes you you, and that if you second guess it too much, then, you're not really helping yourself or anyone else. Yeah. Trust your voice.
Do you have a goal as a filmmaker?
My goal is to make more work and to be more involved with other creative people whose spirits I like. and to do that as regularly as possible. I mean, Around the Sun, as I said, was deliberately designed to be streamlined in every possible way, and it still took such a long time to get even to this point. To some extent, that's because it's the first one for me and for Oliver, the first feature, really. There's, of course, many reasons that anything can take forever. But yeah, I like that idea of streamlining it, because I want to be making stuff instead of worrying about making stuff, or instead of thinking about it, or instead of planning to do it. It's obviously hard right now for a lot of reasons. And the goal is to be making stuff constantly, and to be part of the community, which includes your community. So thank you again for having me on.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're also part of the San Francisco film community. I mean, as a critic, and then also now as like a resident, and as a filmmaker in general. So it's like, and now the Making Movies is Hard community, which I think is like, even a wider community than that, which is awesome.
I love the little spots you've been doing where you get people to talk about their experiences, and just these little clips, and they're amazing. And it's
Liz.
just Liz, well, congrats. And thank you for doing that. It's very inspiring to hear people. And I'm always like, oh, I should Google that person and figure out who they are. Because, you hear these, you get a sense of the industry changing, and you get a sense of a lot of really passionate, creative people out there doing it, or figuring out how to do it and doing it together. And it's much more inspiring than the big picture outlook that I had, 10 years ago even. And so that's very exciting. And thank you for doing that.
Our pleasure. If you could go back in time, what's the one piece of advice you would give yourself?
Oh yeah, good question. I would say, you think this is bad, wait till you meet 2020. No, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of the glib answer. Yeah, I mean, maybe that thing about, I said before, the advice to trust your voice. I would say, no, seriously, don't try to fit yourself into some box, because it's going to be an awkward fit, and you're going to know it's awkward, and then everyone else will kind of know that it is, or at least they're going to know that you feel awkward, and then that doesn't work. And just sort of hang in there. I think everything counts, experience counts, and I don't know, be good to the people you love, basic stuff, cheesy stuff,
nice.
Platitudes.
Nice.
But good to remember. You asked for one. I gave you several.
That's
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's no rules.
Yeah.
Our last question is making movies hard.
No, it's getting them seen that's hard. No, I don't know. It's of course it's hard. I think it's weird because there's so many of them now that you're like, well, obviously it can't be that hard, because look at them all, and I'm trying to fight for attention. But I think it can always be hard, and the way to get through that is to surround yourself with the best people, and to keep going forward.
Amazing.
Awesome.
John, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm honored, and it's nice to chat with you guys.
So where should people go if they're like, oh my gosh, this guy's amazing, I want to watch all his work? Where should people head?
In the unlikely event that happens, they should go probably to aroundthesunfilm.com, and that's the website of the movie, and that will have links to where you can see it. And you can find me there, and you can find Oliver there, and drop us a line if you want.
Thanks so much for listening, and thanks to Jonathan Kiefer for being on the show to talk about his work, and of course Around the Sun, which is another kind of weird, fun movie, which I encourage people to watch.
Yeah.
The first 5 minutes or so, I was like, what is going on? And then you're like, oh, interesting. I will watch more, because it just, flipped the script on me. So definitely check that movie out. You can check out our website at makingmoviesishard.com, where you can find links to the things we talked about in this episode, including Jonathan's work, and then anything that we talked about in the segments that are important, probably the lists of episodes that we gave, that people can actually go and listen to. And if you want to get in contact with us, you can send an email to podcast@makingmoviesishard.com. You can ask us questions. You can rant about things, and we might even read it on the show, because we always need to talk about stuff that people send in, because we have a whole segment about it called You've Got Mail.
Because we want to.
You want to. Yeah. So basically you have a chance of being famous for 5 seconds if you write us an email, because we will talk about it on the show. And even if we don't read the whole email, we'll probably even just mention it, oh, we got this email from this person. So weird. Anyways. Also, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at MMIH Podcast. I am Alrik B on Twitter and Instagram. And Liz, where can people find you?
I'm Liz Manischel on Twitter and Liz Manischel Film on Instagram.
And, I don't think we said this yet, but you can also leave a review on iTunes, which we've been like so blessed to get so many reviews lately. I feel so lucky that people are doing that.
But we want more.
We need more. I want to crush Just Shoot It. I love Just Shoot It. It's my favorite filmmaking podcast. Really, those guys are great. But they have like 200 something ratings, and we have like 180. And I'm like, dude, like we need to like take them over. I want to get to like 250 or 300. Come on now. Like we've been around about actually the same time, but we have way more episodes than they do. So chop chop. Anyways, no, I'm just kidding. I love you guys. I'm so grateful for any review. Thank you guys. Really appreciate it. But yeah, I think that's about it for this episode, and we will talk to you guys next week.
Alrik, what should people do if they want to support the film?
The
Alrik,
film?
what should people do? Oh, God,
Which
words.
film?
All of the films of our lives.